I was asked to do a video about Sam Seder and socialism. I can't think of anyone more cringe than Sam Seder. In fact, I still remember the first and only Sam Seder video I ever watched. A few years ago, Sears filed for bankruptcy. At that time, vulture capitalists were trying to completely liquidate the company. Thankfully, this didn't happen. The bankruptcy court protected Sears and the jobs of 45,000 Americans. I didn't agree with how Sears was being treated, and I wanted to get a lefty point of view on things. So lo and behold, I clicked on Sam Seder's video. Huge mistake. The sheer amount of unhinged Trump derangement syndrome was insane. Everything was a racist conspiracy. It was the most unprofessional thing that I ever watched. I couldn't believe that someone like this was real.
Teach the Americans that are listening to us now. I mean, because that is, even in the context of the piece I just cited, there's not necessarily it's time to try socialism, but there's not really a clear definition as to what that
it is.
means.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Richard Wolff? This is the guy who bases all of his data on the Mondragon worker co-ops. He was the guy Vosh erased from his research document after the video I did. You know, the one where I pointed out that the worker co-ops were created by the fascists? That the people running them were all Basque white nationalists? Well, apparently Richard Wolff is a professor at the New School. The New School is basically a college for the dumbest, most gullible leftists. It's pretty much a scam. The annual tuition is over $50,000. Also, the school's located in Manhattan. So you better factor in a high cost of living if you're going to be a student there. Now, an Ivy League education might be worth $50,000, but the New School definitely isn't. It's ranked 133 by US News. Only 66% of its students manage to graduate with the degree. For the other 44%, the New School is effectively a money shredder. Now, all universities are deep into leftist BS. The New School, though, scams left-wing people by marketing itself as even more rabidly leftist. It doesn't surprise me for a second that they would employ some idiot like Richard Wolff. Remember, this is the guy who Vosh completely wiped from his research doc after I did an 8-minute long video. Can you imagine paying $50,000 to a private university to learn from the most Marxist professor in the US?
So give us a sense of like what would that look like? And because, where are we in the development of socialism? I mean, it's like you're suggesting it's maybe the concept is not as associated with statism in the same way that it was 40, 50 years ago. But where, what would it be? I mean, if we could hand it over to you for a day, and maybe that's not necessarily how it should work process-wise, I guess that's the point. But what would be the roadmap? If people were going to vote on it, what would they be voting on?
Well, I will answer the question, but before I do, I want to put all the honesty I can into the answer and to say that socialists don't agree on this subject. In other words, if you ask me what is the socialist alternative, I can't answer that question because there isn't one.
Yeah, if socialism was a good idea, socialists wouldn't be so confused about it. The fact that there are many different types of socialism speaks to its weakness. You notice capitalism isn't like this. No one who advocates for capitalism would say its definition depends on who you ask.
The collapse of the Soviet Union, for example, after 1989, the big changes in China, in Cuba, in Vietnam, have made all socialists have to go back, in a sense, to the drawing boards to rethink what they mean. Those societies did not survive in the way that they had been prior to, say, 1985 or 1990. And you have to face that. You can't pretend that this didn't happen. So that socialists have been arguing and debating and changing what they think, and they aren't all of a mind at this moment.
Are you kidding me? Perhaps we should try and learn lessons from history. The fact that it's failed every time might actually teach us something about socialism, like the fact that it just doesn't work.
I will tell you what I think in answer to your question, but I wouldn't want it to be misunderstood that what I'm about to say is the universally agreed notion. Having said that, let me tell you what it means to me. It does not mean, let me begin by saying, it does not mean what it once did. It does not mean that the state becomes the owner-operator of factories and farms and offices and stores. Whatever that experience was in the 20th century, it had good results, for sure. It also had awful results. And the awful results had a lot to do with giving the state that much power that would allow it then to abuse that power in ways that we're all too familiar with. So socialists have learned all of that. They are not stupid and they're not blind.
Richard Wolff says socialism has its highs and lows. I disagree. Socialism has never produced anything good. The best case that you could make is that the Soviet Union rapidly industrialized under Joseph Stalin. I'd say that has nothing to do with socialism and everything to do with Stalin. Stalin was notoriously totalitarian. He'd put people in charge of these factories and then set incredibly unrealistic goals. These things were called the 5-year plans. If your factory didn't deliver the results, you were executed or sent to a gulag. Stalin also engaged in mass surveillance through a secret police force. Anyone he suspected of acting corruptly or disloyally was arrested. Did all of this seem to boost industrial yields? Yeah. Being sadistic and cruel to people did work. It also must have been completely miserable for the people living in the Soviet Union. When Stalin died, the Communist Party made sure his replacement wouldn't be anything like Stalin. No sane person would have wanted someone like that leading their country. At that point, the economy of the Soviet Union pretty much fell apart. While Stalin's threats may have boosted industrial yields, it didn't work at all with agriculture. Soviet collective farming was a complete disaster. More people starved to death under Stalin than were killed in World War II and the Holocaust combined. Meanwhile, China didn't seem to get anything good out of socialism. Just a mass starvation that was even more deadly than the Soviet Union. China wasn't really able to even industrialize until it started using capitalism again. Nor has socialism worked for any of the various third world countries that have tried it. It hasn't worked in the US either. LBJ's war on poverty legislation is a failure. It hasn't risen anyone out of poverty. All it's done is trap people there.
And so one of the results has been to conceive of a transition to a situation better than and different from capitalism in the following alternative way. It becomes a focus on the workplace, that place where the adult, for example here, the adult American citizen, spends most of his or her life once you reach adulthood. 5 days of the week, you are working more and more. This is true of women as well as men, for all the reasons we know. And that the result is, if a socialist alternative is visible, is projectable, well, then it has to do with the workplace. And here the idea then becomes pretty simple. We ought to be, as socialists, advocates for the democratization of the workplace.
So socialism is worker co-ops, basically. It's Vosh all over again. Basically, it comes down to this. If you're concerned about workers not having a voice, the best solution is a labor union. You know, an entity that advocates on behalf of the workers? Back in the day, most Americans were members of unions. They seemed to do a pretty okay job. Then you left-wingers became globalists. You turned your backs on the workers. You flooded our nation with third world labor. How can American workers unionize if their workplace can easily be sent to China? Sam, workplace democracy isn't going to fix what your people did to the workers.
Having the workplace be the emblem of, the model of what democracy is. And by that I mean the following. If you are affected by a decision at the workplace, then you must, by rights, by democracy, have a role in making that decision. Just like we arrange that the mayor in our town, who has power to make decisions that affect us, must be in turn subject to our power, for example, at the ballot box, so that there's some control. We don't have that in the workplace. You go to work in the morning, you cross the threshold into your office, your factory, your store, and you enter a place where there is no democracy, where a tiny group of people, usually in a corporation, board of directors, major shareholders, that's 20, 25 people in most companies, those folks make all the decisions. They decide what you produce. They decide the technology of how you produce it. They decide the location of where the factory or the office will be, for example, in New York or in Shanghai or in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
Let me explain why this is totally stupid. Let's say you believe workers in the US have a bad deal. I'd probably agree with that. So the next question is why? Why does working in the US suck? I'd say it's because of the cost of labor relative to other things. That'll always be the most important metric. If the cost of labor is high enough, workers can choose not to take jobs with poor working conditions. They can bargain for more pay in exchange for doing more difficult work. This is especially true if collective bargaining is available through a labor union. In America, the cost of unskilled labor is very low. It's due to decades of mass immigration. It's also because we offshored all of our manufacturing jobs. The proposal by Seder and Richard Wolff is to solve this problem by giving workers democratic power. That's not going to work. If they have the democratic power, in theory, workers can vote to increase the value of their labor. The problem is the cost of labor is set by the market. If a co-op raises labor value above the market price, its competitors will outcompete it. That means the co-op will fail. You might respond, maybe the workers will use their democratic power intelligently. In this event, they won't increase worker wages above the market price. Okay, so what's the point then? Worker co-ops is nothing but a leftist cope. They're so committed to the ideas that immigration and globalism are great. It leads them to come up with dumb and lazy explanations and solutions to problems.
And then most importantly, at the end of the year, they decide, this tiny group of people, what is to be done with the profits that all of you, all of the employees, helped to produce. This produces an economic system that is owned and operated by a tiny number of people who we now see all around us. Make sure that this system is good for them. That's why the rich have gotten richer and the rest of us haven't. If you want an economic system to work for all the people, then you have to put all the people in charge. Otherwise, it won't work for the mass of people, and we'll have the kind of lopsided inequality that has become worse across the last 40 years.
If worker co-ops are so great, where are they? Why is there no national fast food chain that's a worker co-op? The only co-ops I know of are hippie grocery stores. Those hippie grocery stores haven't managed to spread to other cities. The people working at them aren't making significantly more money than regular grocery workers. In fact, the workers at the big chain store I buy groceries at make more money. Wanna know why? Their employees are members of a labor union.
So how does that work in practice? So the government passes a law that says any entity that is chartered as a corporation must have this built into their bylaws. I mean, how does that come about?
Exactly. Good. That's a great question. Let me answer it rather than speculating how it might be. Let me tell you how, as it happens, the British Labour Party right now is doing that. Mr. Corbyn has as his chief economic spokesperson a man named John McDonnell, and he has articulated how they plan to do this in Great Britain when they win the next election.
What? The UK must have had a lot of confidence in that plan. If only they had Dominion voting machines over there, it would be a worker co-op utopia right now.
Here's the plan. Number one. It has two parts, so it's really not complicated. Number one, a law will be passed, just as you said, that will have the following provision. Any company in Great Britain, any factory, any office, any store, can continue as it is now for as long as it stays in its current form. But if it should come to the decision either to, one, close itself down, or two, sell itself to another company, or three, move out of Great Britain to another country, or four, become a public company, that is, issue shares and all of that, before it can make any one of those changes, it has to give, here comes the key point, it has to give what's called right of first refusal to its own workers to buy the company and convert it into a democratically owned and operated worker co-op.
That's the plan? Are you kidding me? Sounds like something someone high on marijuana would come up with. This will never work because you'll never square the value of the company with the value of what it would be as a co-op. Let's say I own a fast food stand in the mall with 4 employees. I know how much profit the business makes, and therefore I could sell it based on that knowledge. According to this plan, I have to offer to sell it to my employees first. Here's the first problem. What if I also work at the business? Maybe I don't draw a salary, but I get the profits and I work to keep labor costs down. The plan has no provision as how something like this would be handled, but that's the reality of most small businesses. Now let's assume there is some way that could be worked out. How are the employees going to afford to buy it? They're fast food workers. Let's say one worker puts up 75% of the buying cost. Then do they get 75% of the votes in the co-op? If not, how is that fair to the employee? If yes, how is the workplace in any way like an actual democracy? Then there's the issue of valuation I alluded to before. I can determine the value of the business based on the profit it makes for me. However, I have no idea what the business would be worth as a worker co-op with business decisions being made democratically.
And when he explains all of that and the audience kind of takes it in, he then says, and I know what's in your mind. I'm going to tell you how we're going to solve problem number 2, which is, where are the workers going to get the money to enable themselves to buy that company? And he smiles and he says, that's when the government of Great Britain will lend the workers that money precisely in order to develop steadily over time a worker co-op sector of the British economy.
Okay, you solved one problem and created 500 others. I already pointed out it's going to be highly speculative what these worker co-ops are going to cost. Now you want government funny money being used to finance this? It's a recipe for massive fraud. Let's say I'm a business owner. I keep my own books. If I want to make out like a bandit, all I have to do is exaggerate the profits my business makes. Then I can sell my business to the workers for a lot more money than it's worth. So I get the money. The workers get stuck with a giant loan that they're not going to be able to repay. When they ask me why they can't pay the loan, guess what I say? I guess worker co-ops just aren't all that profitable compared to private businesses. Are Richard Wolff and Sam Seder incapable of thinking critically about political ideas? That's the problem with socialism. It doesn't account for liars and cheaters. It requires everyone to be honest all the time. That's why it doesn't work. It's why when you don't have Joseph Stalin's secret police on your ass 24/7, it crumbles in the dust. Anyways, I don't need to watch any more of this buffoonery. I didn't realize until I had written half of this script that Sam Seder was barely going to talk in the video. If someone has another Sam Seder video they want me to see a response to, email it to me and I'll pick one. Don't send me a long one though. Sam Seder is boring, and I don't want to watch a long video of him. Anyways, that's all I've got to say for this video. If you enjoyed it, support small YouTube channels like mine by subscribing. Thanks.